brew here.
Yeah, so Brian is actually second in the Player of the Year race for Star City Games, and I think just joining this tournament made him even with Huey. And so if he gets one additional point this tournament, he's actually going to jump him in the Player of the Year race for qualifying for the Players Championship. So that'd be pretty cool because there's not too much time left in this season before the Invitational. But yeah, let's talk about Brian's deck real quick. It's kind of a brew where he has a Stoneforge Mystic package to go get Batterskull. He's also playing some miracles like Terminus, but instead of the normal Entreat the Angels kill condition, he opts to go get Sword of the Meek to go along with Thopter Foundry along with his Stoneforge Mystic. So it's pretty cool. He's got some Enlightened Tutor stuff going on with a Blood Moon, a Humility. He's got Sensei's Top and Counterbalance, so really interesting list.
You see Brian lead off here with a Tundra and a Sensei's Divining Top. Alex Wyatt, his opponent, playing Esper Deathblade simply with a Marsh Flats. And Brian Braun-Duin with an excellent start here of Sensei's Divining Top into a second turn Counterbalance.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the dream draw for the most part for any Counterbalance top deck. You know, this just buys him so much time to eventually assemble whatever he wants to and just prevents his opponent from doing much of anything. Alex not having any sort of answer here is pretty brutal, and he doesn't have anything like Abrupt Decay main deck to get himself out of it. And almost all of his spells cost 1 and 2 with a scant few Lilianos and Jaces that cost 3 and 4. So Brian going to be able to lock him out pretty easily here with the top and Counterbalance.
So Wyatt, with no play on the second turn, just adding a Bayou to his board.
Yeah, Bayou, a land out of the Esper Deathblade deck that I'm not really keen on. I actually like having Savannah a little bit more. You know, when you're playing something like Deathrite Shaman, the land being able to go like green-white into blue-black gives you access to all your colors and can cast all your spells, including Abrupt Decay out of the sideboard. But the fact that it's doesn't tap for blue or white is kind of gross in a deck that is primarily blue or white.
So Brian, happy to sit on his hands here for a little while, just plays a Caracas and says go, and now Alex needs to try to figure out how he's going to navigate through this Divining Top and Counterbalance.
Yeah, I think he really just wants his Liliana to resolve here, which he's about to cast, I'm pretty sure. If it does not resolve, I don't foresee him really putting up too much of a fight this game, assuming that Brian has much of anything to follow up, you know, his really great start of top into Counterbalance.
So for those of you who are not that familiar with Legacy, with Divining Top and Counterbalance, of course, you can, in response to any one casting cost spell, activate the Divining Top and put it on top of your deck. So this effectively soft locks all 1-mana spells for the remainder of the game.
Yep.
Additionally, he can, you know, use Divining Top and effects like Ponder and Brainstorm to manipulate the top card of his deck, potentially allowing him to counter other casting costs as well.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, Alex now going for Liliana the Veil, and we'll see if this prompts a response from Brian.
Yeah, Team Lands in front of spells is not the one I'm going to be rooting for multiple reasons. The glare is a little daunting, I think. I really wish we would just flip-flop, because I think the middle of the board is set up a little bit better for that. Plus, it just looks real gross when you put stuff behind your lands.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are you, Patrick? Which side of the fence are you on that?
Oh, definitely lands and then spells in front.
Good. Because I like you, but I don't like you that much if you're going to be lands in front of spells, guys.
So Brian simply allows Counterbalance to trigger here, reveals Terminus, so fails to counter the Liliana, and it appears that Liliana is now entering play for Alex.
Yeah, I think that means Brian probably has a Vendilion Click. Otherwise, he definitely would have topped. I can't imagine him just like doing it blind for no reason, and it looks like he does have, even though there's a Crocus on Alex's side of the board, he's going to be able to hit the Liliana for a few points and, you know, get it to the point where he can't really edict him. And
so as you correctly predicted, Brian, with an end-of-turn Vendilion Click, targets Alex and reveals a hand of 2 copies of True Name Nemesis, a Batterskull, a Snapcaster Mage, and a Polluted Delta.
Yeah, so since Brian does have the Terminus on top, he's not actually really afraid of all these True Name Nemesis that are in Alex's hand. Even if he doesn't have a 3 on top of his deck to counter them slowly, he does have the answer. So rightly so, he's just leaving all the cards in Alex's hand because the Counterbalance top's going to, you know, soft lock the things like Snapcaster Mage and any 1-drop spells. But also, since he does have the Terminus, he doesn't actually mind him having all those creatures.
So in Brian's upkeep, he's going to activate Divining Top, presumably does not want to draw Terminus this turn.
Right.
So resets the top 3.
Yeah, it looked like he had a land and a Brainstorm to go along with the Terminus, probably keeping the land. You know, probably not wanting to Brainstorm this turn or the next. He's going to be losing another card to the Liliana. I think one of his last 2 cards in hand are Sword of the Meek, and he definitely does not mind discarding that to the Liliana.
So Vendilion Click attacks Liliana down to 1 counter. And Brian plays a Scalding Tarn and passes, which gives him the ability to shuffle his deck at a moment's notice and possibly reset with his Sensei's Divining Top.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really foresee him doing that too much over the next few turns. I think he really just wants to make sure he has the Terminus on top of his deck for the True Name Nemesis, even though, well, Wasteland here, that's actually pretty good.
Also, the Wasteland targeting Caracas.
Yeah, I mean, now the Vendilion Click can actually just die to a removal spell as opposed to being able to get saved from the Caracas. But seeing as Alex has a Caracas too, it's not incredibly relevant. He's just going to be able to bounce the Click every turn and protect his Liliana and make sure he pads his life total over time. So I actually see this match going super long for a lot of reasons. Both decks are pretty slow. I think that Brian's deck does have an edge, but it takes his deck forever to win the game. So I could easily see this game taking like at least half an hour or something.
Oh yeah, it is definitely a slow grind when two blue control decks go at it.
Yeah.
So Alex activates Liliana, Alex discards a True Name Nemesis, and Brian discards a sword, as you alluded to.
Yeah, one funny thing about Deathrite Shaman is that it can't target artifacts in the graveyard. It's very specific on, instant sorcery or land or creature. And so there's literally no fear from Brian that his Sword of the Meek is going to get, exiled somehow. So being able to leave it in the graveyard is fine. Like, he doesn't want to get it randomly Vendilion clicked or something from Alex, because now he's just going to be digging for a Thopter Foundry, and once he finds that, he should be golden.
So Brian again spins top at the end of Alex's turn.
Yeah, probably just going to draw the land, maybe the Brainstorm. Yeah, it looks like he drew the island. So now he's just going to attack, probably going to get a Caracas. But now he can potentially, click Alex again during his draw step to make sure that there's nothing really too frightening going on. If he draws like a Jace the previous turn and then draws like a blue source here and just casts Jace, that's actually something that could be fairly problematic for Brian.
So Brian with a lot of protection against Alex's draw step here. And again, Alex still trying to figure out some way to navigate through Divining Top and Counterbalance, which locks out such a large percentage of his draws.
Yeah, it's a little awkward when you have to float Terminus on top because you get a little less, breathing room as far as like the, casting cost of certain spells. And they generally tend to change every turn. You normally want to float like a 1 and a 2 on top against most decks, but from the way Alex's hand's shaping up to be, you kind of really want to float 2s and 3s. And right now, Brian just has a Brainstorm and a Terminus and an unknown card for now.
So Alex activating Liliana, plussing the Planeswalker. Brian responds to the Brainstorm here.
Yeah, it looks like he drew the Terminus and a few lands that are, one of which is probably going to get discarded. Probably going to, actually, I'm not actually sure what he wants to do here. This
do you think he possibly sets True Name Nemesis on top of the deck because Alex has so many 3 casting costs cards in his hand?
I'm not sure your question because I don't think Brian has True Name Nemesis in his
No,
deck.
sorry, Brian's Vendilion Click in his hand.
Oh, yes, yeah. That's actually a pretty heads-up play. Having that 3 to put back, but now he just wants to shuffle it. He knows that Alex has already discarded 2 True Name Nemesis, so now he just wants to dig for Thopter Foundry, some way to get it. Stoneforge Mystic would also be pretty sweet, being able to go get Batterskull and then eventually hard casting it and just kind of grind out the Liliana over time.
Jace the Mind Sculptor, also a draw that Brian has
Yes.
access to, so a lot of haymakers from this position.
Yeah. Not entirely sure what's in Alex's hand after the last few turns of drawing. Brian here opting to take a peek, so it'll give us a good peek as well.
So an end of turn, Vendilion Click reveals a hand of Tropical Island, Snapcaster Mage, and Batterskull from Alex.
Yep. I feel like it would be fine to take the Batterskull here. Brian doesn't have a whole lot of 5s in his deck other than his own Batterskull, and it resolving could be fairly problematic, but he does have a lot of ways. Once he gets the Thopter Sword going, the Batterskull is virtually irrelevant. He's just going to grind him out over time.
He also has a couple 5s in his deck. He does have 4 copies of Force of Will, so it's not impossible for him to counter it via Counterbalance.
Sure.
So Brian again attacks with Vendilion Click. Again, Alex simply Caracases it back to Brian's hand.
Yeah, Brian passing a turn. I think his draw for the turn was Counterbalance. And I actually like not topping during the upkeep there, because if you just happen to raw dog a Jace the Mind Sculptor or something similar, like to just cast immediately, it's pretty huge. So
And Brian's in not that much of a rush, right? He's happy to play this sort of game right now.
Right. I mean, even though the Liliana is threatening to like potentially make him sack half his permanents, he has about 2.5 more turns or so to find something to actually do, or to find something to deal with the Liliana. The Croc is particularly annoying. Brian is not playing Wasteland, so he has no way to actually get it off the table. He does have potentially Blood Moon in his deck to go get with an Enlightened Tutor. He has 1 copy of Blood Moon, 1 copy of Enlightened Tutor main deck, so
and Brian is
pretty backbreaking.
Brian actually does have Enlightened Tutor among his top 3 cards there, although no red source of mana, so he can't go get Blood Moon right now. Brian is, again...
I think he had a Volcanic Island on top, too, so he could potentially cash in the Sensei's top, and or he could draw into the Enlightened Tutor and then cast it, losing the top, going to get Blood Moon, casting Blood Moon next turn, but then he still has to fight the Liliana, so...
And there's also some potential risk of Alex being able to find a basic lane with that polluted delta and mitigating a lot of the power that Blood Moon has in that spot.
Yeah, this is actually a really awkward spot for Brian because the +1 from Liliana, he's going to cast the Vendilion Click in response, but then Alex is just going to use Caracas to put it back in his hand, and he doesn't have enough mana to cast it again. He doesn't really want to use his top here. So, I mean, he could potentially use his top. If he has a land on top, he could just discard that,
So, in response to the plus power of Liliana, Brian plays the last card in his hand, again, which is the Vendilion Click, reveals a hand of Tropical Ion, Flooded Strand, Batterskull, and Snapcaster Mage.
Decides to take Batterskull. In the long run, I think that's a good play. I feel like he picked the correct time to, take it as well as opposed to waiting, for a few turns. And Alex, surprisingly, not bouncing the Vendilion Click with the Liliana ability still on the stack.
Yeah, there was an opportunity there for Alex to use Caracas on the Vendilion Click with Liliana's plus still on the stack, thus permanently removing the Vendilion Click as it is the last card in Brian's hand.
Yeah. A fetch here from Alex signifies potentially a top deck Jace the Mind Sculptor, which would be very, very good for him. So perhaps he's just main phasing a Snapcaster Mage, or okay, Stoneforge Mystic. Here it comes.
So in response to Stoneforge Mystic, Brian is going to use a Divining Top. Now there is an Enlightened Tutor there, so he could...
He can top Enlightened Tutor for Thopter Foundry, counter the Stoneforge Mystic, untap, cast the Thopter Foundry, but he won't have another artifact in play to sacrifice to get the sword back.
Okay.
So a really weird spot, but I think that's might be the best option here, just because he wants to make sure the Stoneforge Mystic doesn't resolve. Alex is going to be able to go get the Batterskull and then put it into play next turn.
Yeah, this does feel like a pretty threatening Stoneforge Mystic right now, so... But Brian is going to allow it to resolve.
Sure, and yeah, I mean, that's not a terrible play. I mean, in the long run, the Batterskull is not that frightening if you do have the Thopter Sword combo going. So I think Brian here is just content to draw Enlightened Tutor, pass turn, Enlightened Tutor in response to the tick up from Liliana, go get Thopter Sword, and then play it, be able to make 3 guys at that point, sacrificing the Divining Top, which is a little awkward, but you can put the draw ability on the stack with the Divining Top before you actually sacrifice it, getting net, even cards on it. So
a lot of little nuances with this deck.
Yes. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I like the deck. There's a lot of play to it. There's a lot of decision making. Your opponent has to play around a lot of stuff. And if I assume that in games 2 and 3, or potentially game 3, that oh, what is this? Is he recasting the Vendilion Click? Oh, yeah, he's going to take the Batterskull main phase out of his hand. That's actually a good play, too. All right, so now he doesn't actually even have to worry about the Batterskull. But he probably will lose the Vendilion Click next turn to the Caracas plus Liliana, assuming that Alex catches the interaction this time.
Or simply to Liliana's minus.
Right.
So now Batterskull dealt with for the time being through Vendilion Click. Alex untaps. Snapcaster Mage still in hand, although no spells in the graveyard for Alex, oddly enough.
Well, I mean, the deck does play a ton of creatures. 16 total creatures in the main deck with Stoneforge Mystic, Snapcaster, True Name, Deathrite, and the Singleton Vendilion Click. It's not uncommon for the Esper Deathblade decks to get flooded on creatures, and that's one of the reasons why I like playing a lot more cards like Thoughtseize in the main deck, just to, way less Lilianas, way less Jaces, and just, playing cards that can turn on Snapcaster Mage and interact with your opponent much more quickly.
So in response to the Liliana plus power, Brian is Enlightened Tutoring in response. This is causing Alex to respond with a Brainstorm. Brian is able to counter that with a Sensei's Divining Top on top of his deck through Counterbalance, and now Enlightened Tutor resolves, and we'll go see what Brian's going to go get.
Yeah, Blood Moon's at, a reasonably high point for him, I think, simply because the Deathblade decks don't really play a whole lot of basic lands, and it looks like
Alex's deck is without any basics.
Yeah, so Alex has no basics, so Blood Moon will shut him down completely. However, the Liliana being able to potentially ultimate next turn means that Brian needs to do something like much bigger, and the Thopter Foundry is definitely that.
It's an argument for him to try to do something a little more proactive, because Liliana is making it so sitting on his hands forever really isn't an option.
Yeah, agreed. If he Enlightened Tutors, cast Blood Moon, Alex just in response bounces Vendilion Click, and then ultimates Liliana, and he can even do the Blood Moon versus everything else if he just wants to get out of the Blood Moon lock, or pick and choose a few things, like maybe you get to keep the counterbalance in the Blood Moon but no other permanents.
Right.
So do or die, as they say.
So Brian again taking a little more of an aggressive route here, so he has another soft lock element of his deck set up momentarily here.
Yeah, the Liliana ultimate is probably just going to pit the Thopter Foundry versus everything else. So, and that means Brian's going to have to either draw like the second copy of Thopter Foundry, but he's going to have, he's not going to have a Divine Top in play if he wants to turn on his Thopter Sword. So he's going to have to dig for either like another top to keep the counterbalance lock going, or an Academy Ruins, or the second copy of Thopter Foundry. So.
But he will have some amount of breathing space with Liliana off the table.
Right. And that is assuming that Alex does want the ultimate. He could draw, a couple different cards that could potentially change his logic behind wanting to actually ultimate the Liliana. But yeah, and this is all still with the Liliana +1 on the stack.
Yeah. So Alex discards
lots of stuff going on.
Alex discards the Snapcaster Mage with only Brainstorm in the graveyard. Pretty unrealistic for him to be able to get much value out of the Brainstorm there with Divining Top and Counterbalance still in play. Attacks for one with Stoneforge Mystic. We'll see Alex now down to one card in hand. We'll see if he has any follow-up.
Yeah, and once again, Alex missing that interaction that doesn't really happen too often. Your opponent has no cards in hand, has a creature in play that you can Caracas. Bouncing it with the +1 of Liliana on the stack would have been pretty huge at two different points in this game, and it could have ultimately cost him over the next couple of turns.
So Brian goes ahead and adds Thopter Foundry that he just Enlightened Tutor for. Vendilion Click into Liliana. Again, Caracas sends it back to the hand.
Yeah, and since Brian wants to sacrifice, the Divine Top anyway, he can put the draw trigger on the stack, create 3 tokens from Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek, and then discard the random card off the top, keeping the Vendilion Click, assuming he wants to actually keep the Vendilion Click.
Alex untaps and draws. Liliana at 6 counters, Stoneforge Mystic in play. 5 lands, including Caracas, but pretty low on resources right now.
Yeah, I mean, he could pit just lands versus all other permanents, and then Brian wouldn't actually be able to operate with his Thopter Sword combo. But he would have 3 flyers, one of which has a Sword of the Meek on it, a counterbalance in play. So there's a lot of options for Liliana here, and honestly, I would have no idea how to pile this, correctly in the abstract. I do know that you have to get Thopter Foundry off the table, so you have to make it as unappealing as possible for him to keep the Thopter Foundry in play, seeing as he doesn't have any other answer to it in his main deck.
So Alex goes ahead and cracks his Polluted Delta, finds a Tundra. Underground Sea, rather, changes his mind.
Yeah, I mean, not really sure what he drew here. We'll see in a moment, but likely going to ultimate Liliana before making any decisions about what to cast.
And you are correct. So Liliana goes ultimate. We'll see.
No, Brian. Draw a card first. No. All right, well, I'm going to have to go talk to him after this match and inform him of the interaction of drawing a card
I think that he said that he was responding to the... Nope, he did not.
Yeah.
It looked for a second there. I couldn't tell. I thought he looked like he was pointing at one and the other, but it appears to not be the case.
Unfortunately, I do not think the Star City squad brought Thopter tokens to the event.
I don't know. I've been surprised before by the tokens that show up
we
here.
did have we got them. We did have assassins yesterday at the ready. That was awesome. Me and Cedric watched a match on camera where a guy ultimate of Raska and his opponent immediately scooped, and we didn't even get to see him turn his assassin sideways.
We had a lot of first dubs yesterday in the Standard Open. A Sylvan Primordial Mirror match took place. Yeah, it was a fun one yesterday.
Yeah, I heard somebody got Bramble Crush yesterday.
A couple times.
Man, I bet Alex wishes he had a Bramble Crush right now.
So Alex now in the process of trying to split this. Lands versus spells seems like a pretty obvious place to start here, although you might be able to squeeze a little more value up by putting, one land as alongside all the spells, although that allows him to keep Thopter Foundry going, so a lot of complexity here.
Yeah, I mean, basically he just wants to make sure that the Thopter Foundry is in the pile that Brian most wants to sacrifice, right? Like, Brian doesn't have another artifact that's, he can really sacrifice, since Thopter Foundry is non-token, so you can't actually sack a Thopter to get back the sword. So he has to naturally draw like another artifact to be able to sacrifice if the sword goes back to the graveyard. So looks like we're doing one land and a bunch of Thopters and the Thopter Foundry versus Counterbalance Sword, a guy with a sword on it. So yeah, looks like Brian's going to keep the pile on the left.
And he does. So instead of a straight lands versus spells split, we saw a mixture of lands and spells in both piles.
I feel like the Thopter should still be equipped to the sword, right? I think we should. I don't know why it became unattached. Yeah, we're going to take a look into that. I think that should still be equipped. The Liliana, there's no weird clause that, when you're separating the piles, it unattaches or whatever.
So Stoneforge Mystic again attacks Brian.
Yeah, I mean, and this would be pretty huge here. If Brian had the Thopter as a 2/3, he could block, but... Oh, sure. Okay.
So the equipped Thopter was in a split in a different pile, so the game state is correct. Brian comes across for 1 point of damage with his Thopter token.
Missing the prime ability to equip Sword of the Meek and deal an extra point of damage. No, I'm assuming Brian just has something to do here with this mana and wants to play around like Spell Pierce or as much as possible, so...
Yeah, the extra point of damage is probably not that impactful.
Yeah, a second Liliana here from Alex is pretty big game. Brian looks like he has a Brainstorm in response to hopefully put a 3 on top, which he has the Vendilion Click in his hand still.
So Brainstorm in response here with Counterbalance Trigger on the stack.
Andrew Jace. And then I think it's a second click as well, so definitely just going to put a click on top, counter, and then maybe hold up Counter Spell for a turn, and then cast Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Reveals Vendilion Click, which counters the Liliana. Alex has a Deathrite Shaman.
Yeah, Brian keeping the Counter Spell and the second Vendilion Click in hand. Going to use this Counter Spell here on the Deathrite Shaman, since it could potentially threaten his life total over the next few turns. Alex stuck with 1 card in hand, which is a Lonely Force of Will.
So Brian takes a point of damage here from Stoneforge Mystic, and this may open up the door for Brian to land Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Yeah, well, he put the Jace too deep, so he's going to just have 2 clicks in hand this turn, but he can click himself and get rid of a click and draw the Jace at the end of Alex's turn. Also has the option to click Alex during his end of turn, make sure that the coast is clear. If he does that, he'll see that Alex has the Force of Will. He'll take that. Hopefully he doesn't draw another one, and then he'll resolve his Jace on the next turn.
So Stoneforge Mystic in the red zone. Brian taps 3, appears that he's going to deploy Vendilion Click, takes it back, simply takes 1 point of damage.
Oh, takesies backsies.
The old takesies backsies.
All right, so end of turn. Looks like he's probably going to click Alex here. but it's going to get forced anyway, which is completely fine. Brian, that's like best case scenario for Brian because he has the second click in hand. The Krakus was already locking the click down, but Alex potentially drew something he wanted to protect with that Force of Will. So Jace coming down, looks like a good one. We're probably just we may +2, but Brainstorm sounds like a pretty sweet option here.
So Brian able to resolve Jace the Mind Sculptor, looks at 3 with the Brainstorm power on Jace. Again, another Jace, a Brainstorm.
I'm loving BBD's deck right now. I know it's like a mishmash of like 3 different decks that I love to play with in Legacy or just like older formats in general. I used to play, Thopter Depths when it was in old Extended with Vampire Hex Mage and Dark Depths and stuff. Jerry T Special. And, he has like, the Counterbalance top going, which I also love. And then sometimes he's just a normal Stoneforge into Batterskull deck. So
a lot of different angles of attack here.
Right.
So Stoneforge into Jace. Brian says that's fine. Jace down to 2 counters. And now Brian untapping with a boatload of mana in a position to really start taking this game over.
Whoa, that's a pretty small boat. 4 is not that much.
And by Legacy standards, 4 is quite a bit.
Yes, that's true. But yeah, it looks like Brian is just flush with resources here. Kind of wants his second Thopter Foundry, kind of wants another Divining Top, is content with having like Terminus, Brainstorm to make sure that he doesn't lose to any random shenanigans. But, Alex here still chugging away, even though I felt like he's been at a significant disadvantage for most of this game and is just fighting really hard to grind back into it. And Brian just continually putting up permanents that are really tough for Alex to deal with in general. Swords to Plowshares here coming down for the Thopter, which Brian could potentially Brainstorm into a 1-mana spell to counter the Swords to Plowshares here, but opts to save the Brainstorm for a better spot.
So Jace down to 2 counters and as of right now, vulnerable. Stoneforge Mystic into the red zone, knocks Jace down to 1 counter, and Alex with no other play. Brian at the end of the turn plays a Vendilion Click. Targets Alex with the trigger on the stack. Alex plows the Vendilion Click, reveals a land in hand.
Yeah, I mean, all this is fine with Brian. He has a backup Jace. He has a Terminus on top. He may actually just jam Terminus here to make sure that his Jace stays safe. Okay, no, it looks like he's stacked. Now the Terminus is 1 more deep, so if he wants to Brainstorm, or actually cast Brainstorm, not use Jace's ability, he can do it at instant speed on Alex's turn.
So Brian switching gears a little bit, plussing Jace to 3, fate sealing Alex, who has no way in play of shuffling his deck, and Brian leaves it on top.
Yeah, so probably another land, potentially. Okay, it looks like a Force of Will, and not really doing a whole lot here, although it is one of the few spells that he could easily cast out of, a soft counterbalance lock. And Brian here opting to cast Terminus off the top to get rid of the threat, and now his Jace is just free to do whatever Jace does.
So Alex not wanting to Force a Will this Terminus lets the Stoneforge Mystic go, and now Jace with clear rain here. Brian with counterbalance, sword in play, Jace at 2. Brainstorming right now with Jace. Aware of the contents of Alex's hand, which is just a Force of Will.
Yeah, I mean, one of my actual least favorite things about Legacy sometimes is that you can be really far ahead and be like 99% to win a game, but it actually just takes forever to win the game.
Yeah.
And Alex, knowing that, wants to save time because they are about 28 minutes deep into the round, and he wants to be able to win games 2 and 3. And since he can be more of an aggressive deck with, True Name Nemesis, Stoneforge Mystic, whereas Brian's almost always going to be a control strategy, Alex wants to try to be able to win game 2 as quickly as possible so they actually have time to play game 3.
So Brian Braun-Duin takes game 1 here against Alex Wyatt playing Esper's Deathblade. Going to the sideboard here, I have Alex's in front of me. He has 2 Spell Pierces, a Force of Will, a Flusterstorm, 3 Surgical Extractions, a Zealous Persecution, a Thoughtseize, an Inquisition of Kozilek, a Path to Exile, a Venser, an Abrupt Decay, and 2 Supreme Verdicts. I like bringing in the additional discard spells in the Thoughtseize and the Inquisition. I like bringing in Abrupt Decay, as it's a good way to break up counterbalance naturally.
Yeah.
Venser is another angle of attack that you can see in long games, especially alongside Caracas, that can be very disruptive in some control mirrors. So I anticipate the Venser coming in. And even though this is not typically the matchup you'd anticipate surgical extraction being valuable. Brian has demonstrated some value going on out of his graveyard. It's possible that Alex brings in maybe not all 3 surgical extractions, but at least 1 or 2 to fight some of the, the sword Thopter stuff that's going on in Brian's deck.
Right. From Brian's side, I think he just really, really wants to punish his opponent with Blood Moon. He doesn't have any additional copies on the board, but he does have an additional Enlightened Tutor, which he could bring in. A Wear and Tear could be solid at helping make sure that Batterskull never really gets online for his opponent. Detention Sphere, which is just a versatile removal spell for, an opposing Jace or what have you. The rest of his sideboard looks like it's really geared towards beating aggro and combo decks. So, I don't really suspect Pyroblast is coming in this matchup. Sword of Feast and Famine doesn't really seem like it's coming in this matchup. So maybe a Pithy Needle because of how powerful Liliana can be in the long game. And I think Brian does have to expect some number of Abrupt Decays coming out of the sideboard of the Esper Deathblade deck, since he did see Bayou. Because normally if there's no actual green cards in the deck, Tropical Island is the only green source.
Sure.
So Brian going to have to be a little wary of Abrupt Decay. If there's a Deathrite Shaman in play, he's not necessarily going to be safe to cast the Blood Moon, for one. And if Alex does happen to draw as 1 of Abrupt Decay, could be pretty bad for Brian if his entire game plan is Enlightened Tutor for Blood Moon.
Yeah, Blood Moon is a card, definitely is one of the, Chalice of the Void style, just random Punisher cards that exist in Legacy. There's a percentage of the room that can't really beat it, and then there's a percentage of the room that doesn't really care about it very much. There's a little fluctuation inside of that, but you're definitely trying to capitalize on a particular percentage of the room. And we've really seen a lot of uptick recently in Blood Moon, with Painter's Servant putting up a top 8 in Grand Prix Paris, and also winning the St. Louis Legacy Open last week.
Yeah, I actually think that Blood Moon is just a great card right now, and a lot of these fair decks, Rug Delver, Bug Delver, all forms of Delver basically, most forms of Stoneforge Mystic decks, excluding just the straight blue-white win, which doesn't see that much play anymore in comparison to the Deathrite Shaman versions. Very few of these fair decks play any basic lands at all. Sometimes they play 1 or 2, but a lot of times their spells are built around their mana base or vice versa, so that they want to have as many dual lands as possible to be able to hit every spell on the correct turn, as opposed to having a basic island in your deck and having Hymn to Torok. It's just incredibly awkward and causes for some really, really bad draws on occasion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like since Deathrite Shaman's moved in these decks, a lot of people have this attitude of, well, I don't care about Wasteland as much as I used to because I have a natural mana advantage against most of my opponents, so I can afford to play a lot of non-basics and play all these spells alongside one another, because Deathrite Shaman allows me to get ahead on mana. But Wasteland isn't the only factor here. Blood Moon and Magus of the Moon to a lesser degree are also factors, and we're seeing an uptick of that in Legacy in recent weeks.
Yep.
Alex leads off the game on turn 1 with a Flooded Strand. Brian with just a basic island.
Yeah. The speed of these two players definitely going to be increasing this game. They know that they've spent a lot of time. We're actually on the actual game clock. We're actually down to 13 minutes. But on the feature match clock, we have about 18 left. So game 1 was a grind, even though it looked like Brian was heavily favored from just his opening, 2 plays. That's just the nature of these, slower mid-rangier control decks in Legacy. They just take a while to win, and, sometimes it's just about inevitability. And Alex, I think, correctly conceding earlier on than he was actually dead. Just because he was so far behind from the Jace, the counterbalance, the potential for Thopter Sword combo again. So
a turn 2 Ponder here from Alex. Brian going for a basic island and a counterbalance. It appears that Alex has Spell Pierce, which he does, countering the counterbalance.
Yeah, these guys both playing fast, shortcutting, making sure to save as much time as possible so that they potentially have a chance to finish the entire match and go to game 3.
Stoneforge Mystic the play for Alex.
Yeah, probably going to get Batterskull. Potentially gets some sort of something or another, and cannot see what that card is.
He went and got Batterskull.
Okay.
There is a sort of, he went and got Batterskull. There is no extra equipment in his sideboard.
Sure, okay. So Jitte not really going to cut the mustard too much in this matchup. Brian has a lot of ways to actually deal with his opponent's creatures, so I hope Brian just naturally raw dog the Blood Moon and just jams it on turn 3 here. That would be a delight.
Yeah, running the counterbalance into a potential Spell Pierce feels like he's trying to set up
boom.
Blood Moon, and there it is, Blood Moon, the play for Brian. putting
Yeah.
Alex to the test right now, because if this is in play, the
has-
number of
yeah.
spells in Alex's deck that he can actually cast becomes very slim. We're looking at
you
just
can
the equipment.
hard cast Batter Skull.
And Numazawa's Jitte. So
Yeah, so that's I don't know what to say. That's just really ridiculous that Brian didn't even have to tutor for it. Just has the 1-up Blood Moon. Just baits him with the turn 2 counterbalance with the Spell Pierce. YOLO Blood Moon on 3, resolves. GG boys.
And here's Jace the Mind Sculptor for Brian.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible so he's bouncing his Stoneforge Mystic, and next turn, if Alex goes land Germ Token, Brian can just bounce the token. So it looks like Brian's definitely in the driver's seat here. Alex has no play, locked out under Blood Moon, has nothing really to do in his deck other than cast Batter Skull. So,
And Alex with no 5th land here, and now Brian is entering the Fate Seal stage of the game. Leaves the 5th land on top for Alex, which is a Wasteland, and Alex attempts a Batter Skull.
I feel like giving him land was actually possibly one of the worst things to leave him with on top right, because he can't actually cast a single spell in his deck, and Brian has to an extent know that a little bit. Brian here actually having to face off against his own token, but quickly gonna disappear.
And so
Goodbye, Brian.
uses the Unsummon on the Germ. Brian also constrained by the Blood Moon in play with a Detention Sphere in his hand that would likely lock the game up, that he cannot cast, as he had all of his white sources of mana are off of non-basics.
Yeah, so it looks like we're going to have this game here of Jace tick up, Jace tick down, Jace tick up, Jace tick down. Plussing, eventually getting to the ultimate status, but again, this is going to take a while.
So Brian with a Preordain.
Yeah, oddly enough, Brian is playing Preordain over Ponder, which when you're playing Blood Moon, I think is actually correct in a lot of scenarios, because, for example, here, if it was 2 bad cards on top, or like, 1 good card, 1 bad card, he couldn't choose to, get rid of one of them and keep the other one. So a little bit of nuance there as far as random dig spells in Legacy is concerned. So.
Because your fetch lands are shut off, your Ponder
Correct.
becomes a little bit worse.
Correct.
And
Yep.
Alex just taps the mat.
Yeah, I mean...
The writing's on the wall there. I mean, Alex is maybe, a fraction of a % chance of winning that game, but he doesn't want to slog through that, and I don't blame him. So
Yeah,
Brian
I mean,
Braun-Duin on the back of Blood Moon wins 2-0.
Definitely just choosing to save the extra 13 minutes to go get a snack before the next round.
Alex, I like
Smart
your
play.
style.
Yeah, it's a good play.
So Brian Braun-Duin wins the match 2-0, pretty convincing fashion, and moves on to 3-0. This is the tournament where he's going to move into first place.